And if the intruder theory has any legs, then you believe they wouldn't hear the scream that the neighbor across the street heard.
That's correct. And if you'll also notice, even the windows on the side, they're very thick, double-strength windows. And there's no window on that particular side of the house where the scream would exit out that vent.
But even if you accept all that, there's another question. When would an intruder have had time to get into the house without anyone knowing?
So I'm not quite sure if I follow Lou Smith's reasoning there. He talks about double pane glass, which would make it harder actually for the neighbor to hear a scream coming from the Ramsey home. And in theory then, because it's harder, it would be louder if they did hear it, which would make it even more likely that the Ramseys inside the house would hear it. But regardless of that, if you look in the background while the two are walking upstairs, notice the windows around them. Notice just how visible the inside is to the outside. And so in this analysis, while we've previously asked the question about did any neighbors hear anything, and there were neighbors who heard something, now the question is, what did the neighbors see?
I got nightmares in my head, I fear. Thoughts build up until I can't feel. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. Well, I'm very excited to bring you part 2 of this whole question around the lights. It's actually a fascinating area of the Ramsey case. Again, quite disappointing to see how few people, compared to the other videos, are interested in this topic. It seems like it's a very basic area, not particularly exciting. I think it's a very exciting area of the Ramsey case. And in point number 3 of those 7 sparkling insights, we were dealing with this whole question of it's easier to see inside a house at night. And this is really important when you think about what did the neighbors see. Now, we're not trying to say that the neighbors saw the crime taking place from outside the house. What we're simply trying to look at is, was there unusual light activity on Christmas night? And what do you think the answer is to that question? Was there unusual light activity in terms of the Ramsey house? And I don't know about you, in terms of my home, I have particular habits in terms of what lights are left on at night and which lights are turned off as well. What about you? Well, guess what? The Ramsey home had those habits, those patterns as well, and the neighbors were familiar with them. Before we get to that, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Please make sure you are subscribed. By the way, thank you so much for the very generous super thanks. Although interest in this case does seem to be subsiding, I think we'll definitely cover it for another 2 weeks and then assess where we are in mid-February. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please hit the thanks button and let's get started. So, what did the neighbors see? We're going back to point number 3. It's easier to see inside a house at night. And we're going to jump right into Detective James Kolar's version of events dealing with this. The lights in Burke's second-floor bedroom were the first to burn early on Christmas morning, and it wasn't long before the kidnappers were able to observe movement in the living room of the home. Lights from the Christmas tree were plainly visible from the van. The gentle light cascaded from the living room windows to the darkened front lawn. Christmas was underway, ... Now, this is actually a hypothetical in foreign faction, and it's basically where the detective basically takes you through an intruder scenario. You know, if the intruder scenario is true, what could have happened? And you actually realize just how absurd it is when he actually presents this whole hypothesis from beginning to end. But this is actually the reality, is that one way that you're going to determine what is going on inside the house and the rest is the lights being on in the house and being able to see inside the house and being able to see JonBenet. And through this hypothetical, which I don't believe is true, I don't think there was actually someone on the outside looking in, but through this hypothetical, you get a sense of someone who's on the outside looking in, someone coveting, someone jealous, someone greedy perhaps in a certain way. And I do think that those thoughts, those sentiments were at play one way or another in this case. So this is a really interesting area. Let's get down to brass tacks. Lights were on that shouldn't have been, and lights were off that night, Christmas night, that shouldn't have been. And in order to deal with this, let's go to Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, around about page 76 by Lawrence Schiller. At about midnight, Scott Gibbons, a neighbor, looked out his kitchen window towards the Ramsey's house and saw a light on in the kitchen area. Sometime later, Adam Vermeer, another neighbor who was up watching TV, said he didn't notice anything strange through the window that faced the Ramsey's house. In other words, it's suggesting that possibly not a lot later, the upstairs lights were all in darkness. Now, as investigators, what we want to do is reconcile fragments of information with what we know in terms of the fabric of this case. And what can we do with this fragment of information saw a light on in the kitchen area? Well, how about this whole idea that JonBenet ate a piece of pineapple? Well, if she did, where would she do that? And if she was eating pineapple in the kitchen, surely the kitchen light would be on late at night, and that is exactly what the neighbor seems to have witnessed. Now let's go to Steve Thomas's book around about page 41, JonBenet Inside the Ramsey Murder Investigation. And so the same thing. While the house search went on, other cops fanned out to canvass the neighborhood and conduct more interviews. A resident directly to the south reported that the light was off in the southeast corner in the sunroom of the Ramsey home and thought that was odd because it was the only time she was aware in the past few years that it did not burn all night. Then a neighbor to the north would say that the Butler kitchen lights were on around midnight and considered that unusual since it was the first time he had noticed that light being on in the Ramsey home. So you've got odd things taking place around the lights. Now again, it's not that you need to see inside the house, it's simply that the lights being on is going to be visible through the window and the neighbors noticed this. And then there's even a third observation from a third neighbor to the west who said that her dogs who barked at anyone walking in the alley, just as they did when the police officer came to question her, made no noise Wednesday night, the night of the incident. Now that information tends to reinforce the idea not only that there wasn't an intruder, but we've also got to wonder about this idea of someone else being at that house and then leaving later on a bicycle. Well, if they did, they didn't leave through that alleyway. Maybe they left through the opposite end of the house where the bicycle tracks are in the snow. Then we have a third source dealing with Scott Gibbons, and this is from the Bonita Papers from 1999. A canvass of the neighborhood was conducted the following day to talk to neighbors about anything seen or heard the evening of December 25th and early morning hours of December 26th. However, very little information of value was received. One of the neighbors, Scott Gibbons, did say he looked out his kitchen window around midnight on December 25th and noticed that the upper lights in the Ramsey's kitchen were on, and then this detail, and dimmed low. So you've got to wonder if the kids were up and they weren't supposed to be, and the lights were dimmed low in order not to alert the parents of this. One can also not help wondering, was the ransom note written in the kitchen at this time with the lights dimmed low? Somehow I find that a little bit unlikely because you could still see someone in that situation. It probably would be too much of a risk. Or perhaps at this point someone was looking for the pen and paper in the kitchen. That's the other aspect. Now, the light that was off, was that to conceal a fourth person leaving the home at some point, perhaps on a bicycle? I mean, that is a light that's going to shine outside. But I think you'll agree with me, in sum, there was some unusual light activity which was visible through the windows on the night of the incident, which brings us to number 4. It's easier to see inside a house at night over Christmas. Why is this? Well, because you've got Christmas trees inside the home and they're illuminated often right through the night. And this then brings us to the question, where was the ransom note written? Could it have been written via the light of a Christmas tree? In other words, not necessary to turn a light on. If you're the intruder, you can write it by the light of the Christmas tree. And is this why the handwriting is so messy? Or was it likely to have been written in the basement? If you think about it, what is the ideal place to do something in a house that's like an aquarium? Well, is the basement like an aquarium as well? And this is also why I think the 911 call was actually made from the basement, not from the kitchen. That's aside from the fact that you can't cradle or you can't miscradle a wall phone, which is what the kitchen phone was. Again, do you see how we are reconciling evidence here? And then number 5, did Patsy turn on the light in JonBenet's room? So I'm going to spend a little bit of time on number 5, which means we're not going to be able to get to point 6 and 7 before the attention spans run out. But I want to deal with a very insulting point that was made on Reddit. Someone wrote, my own bedroom lamp can be turned on by a light switch just inside my bedroom door. It's common for at least one power outlet in a bedroom to be powered by a switch by the door. And so they were just saying how stupid my reasoning was around this particular point. You know, I have this in my house, and so it's so obvious. I don't know why this person doesn't realize this. And you see this kind of projection so often, not only in the Ramsey case, but in true crime. You know, I have this situation in my life, you know, it's so clear and obvious, and it's absolutely clear that it was happening in this case. You're not allowing the evidence to lead you. You're not being curious. You're not keeping an open mind. You are imposing your knowledge and your thoughts into a particular case, and now it's so simple and so obvious. Let's go to what Patsy Ramsey says on the specific topic of the lamp on JonBenet's bedside table. Now, you must also remember, if that lamp's burning through the night and JonBenet's got a bedroom window, and that often those windows are open, the curtains are open, couldn't an intruder have gotten onto the balcony and seen JonBenet through a bedroom window? And so Patsy is asked about this question. You know, what was the door open? Was the light on? Which lights were on? All of that kind of thing. Patsy says, well, I closed it because if I did leave a light on out here, it would shine pretty brightly into a room. And I think she's talking about the light in the den, the light that's in the sort of area where the ironing board and the dryer is right outside JonBenet's bedroom. And so she says it would shine pretty brightly into a room. So I close it to make it a little darker in there. But I want to leave it so if she needed me or call me, then I could hear her, you know. Tom Haney. So she was basically saying I could hear JonBenet from my bedroom, which is what a good mother would do. Tom Haney. So that was the normal. Patsy says, no, at the time I did not. Tom Haney, did you happen to notice if there was any light coming from inside, meaning inside JonBenet's room? Patsy, I didn't notice. Just nothing seemed unusual. So Patsy's basically saying in terms of the lights, nothing seemed unusual in terms of the lights coming from JonBenet's room. There's quite a lot more to say about this, but let's deal with this question. It's obvious there's a light switch at the door. Thomas Haney actually brings this up. Do you recall that the lamp being on in the morning of the 26th? Patsy says, no, I don't remember. Trip de Muth, how do you turn that lamp on? This is the critical question. Patsy, Trip says, you have to go to the lamp to turn it on. Patsy Ramsey, yes. De Muth, not a light switch on the wall. Patsy Ramsey, I don't think so. Again, it's important that your knowledge of this case trumps your own personal knowledge of yourself and your own house. This is aimed at the person on Reddit, and it really isn't very nice and very kosher criticizing me based on your own knowledge of your own home and your lack of knowledge of this case. Is that clear? I mean, here this very question is brought up by a police investigator and he's asking Patsy and she answers it. How can it be clearer than that? So I'm not going to take it further than that. We'll deal with the other points. There's actually a lot more to say about this, if you'll allow me a chance to say it. But let me leave you with a critical question. Do you think they turned on a light? Do you think either of the Ramseys, John or Patsy, turned on a light in order to read the ransom note? And have you ever thought about that question?
Food for thought.
Thank you very much to those who have listened this far, and I'll see you guys next time for part 3 in this fascinating analysis.